Welcome back to Whispers of Wisdom. Drop your city name in the comments if you liked the video. Let's start the story. It all began on a hot, dry morning when the sun beat down mercilessly on the neighborhood. Lawns had turned yellow, flowers wilted, and every hose seemed to run just a little weaker than the day before. The drought had been dragging on for weeks, and while most residents struggled to keep their yards alive, I had found a way to stay prepared. Behind my home, lined neatly in a row, stood several large green water barrels. Each one carefully collected the rainwater that had fallen during the rare storms we had earlier in the season. It wasn't just about gardening, it was about survival. For me, those barrels represented independence and security. While others worried about restrictions, I had peace of mind knowing my family wouldn't go without. But that sense of security was short-lived. A letter appeared in my mailbox, stamped with the emblem of the HOA. At first glance, I thought it might be a routine notice. Instead, it was an official violation. According to them, my barrels were unsightly, in violation of community standards, and most shockingly considered an act of hoarding water. The fines would begin immediately unless I removed them. I might have dismissed it as a misunderstanding, but the next morning, I saw the HOA president herself standing at the end of my driveway. Dressed in her trademark red suit and heels, she surveyed my property with a look of triumph, as if she had caught me committing some crime. Neighbors glanced from behind curtains, whispering about the confrontation they knew was coming. In that moment, I realized this wasn't about appearances. This was about control. And if I didn't stand my ground, the HOA was ready to strip away the very independence I had worked so hard to build. The warning letter was only the beginning. Within days, the HOA escalated their campaign. Another notice arrived, this one more aggressive than the last. Not only was I fined for keeping the barrels, but they also threatened to restrict my access to community water if I didn't comply. They claimed that by stockpiling, I was creating an unfair advantage and disrupting neighborhood balance. It was absurd. I wasn't hoarding. I was collecting rain that fell freely from the sky. But the HOA wasn't interested in fairness. They were interested in control. Karen, the president, wasted no time in flaunting her authority. She strutted through the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, boasting that she would put an end to my so-called violations. Some neighbors nodded nervously, too afraid to speak against her, while others whispered quietly, unsure of what side to take. The unspoken rule in the community was clear: you didn't cross the HOA, and you especially didn't cross Karen. What she didn't know, however, was that I wasn't as vulnerable as she believed. Years earlier, I had invested in more than just water barrels. Solar panels lined my roof, feeding into backup batteries in my garage. A small generator sat ready in case of emergencies, and a discreet irrigation system ensured my lawn stayed green even when others dried out. While the HOA thought they held all the power, I had quietly built my own independence. Karen's threats grew bolder, and she even hinted at further restrictions if I didn't surrender. But as I looked at my self-sufficient setup, I realized something important. She could find me, she could threaten me, but she couldn't take away the fact that I had already freed myself from her control. And soon, she would learn just how powerless she truly was. The HOA wasn't satisfied with sending letters and piling on fines. They wanted to humiliate me, to make an example out of my resistance. So one Saturday morning, they arrived at my property in full force. A group of board members marched down the street, clipboards in hand, flanked by Karen herself, leading the charge in her bright red suit as if she were on a battlefield. Behind her, a man carried a camera, documenting every corner of my yard as though I were some criminal caught in the act. They didn't bother knocking. Instead, they spread out across my lawn, pointing at the barrels, taking measurements, and scribbling furiously. Karen's voice carried across the street, announcing my violations, loud enough for every neighbor to hear. People peeked through curtains, others stood on porches, watching the spectacle unfold. The message was clear: cross the HOA, and this is what happens to you. But I was ready. I calmly pulled out a folder I had kept on hand for months. A thick stack of permits, legal codes, and county approvals. Each rain barrel had been installed according to regulation, every setup documented and signed off by local authorities. As Karen jabbed her finger toward the barrels, I laid the papers neatly across the table. The board members hesitated, their confidence wavering as they skimmed the official stamps and signatures. Still, Karen refused to back down. Her face reddened, and she began shouting about community unity and neighborhood standards, desperate to twist the narrative. What she didn't know was that I had cameras of my own, recording every insult, every threat, every false accusation. She thought she was putting me on display, but in truth, she was handing me all the evidence I would need to turn the tables on her. By the following week, the pressure from the HOA had reached its peak. Notices stacked in my mailbox, each one carrying heavier fines than the last. Bright orange papers were taped to my fence, announcing to the entire neighborhood that I was in violation of water regulations. Karen had even taken it upon herself to post public shaming notices at the community bulletin board, painting me as selfish and reckless. But something unexpected began to happen. Instead of isolating me, the HOA's campaign drew attention. Neighbors who had quietly endured Karen's reign started approaching me with curiosity. They wanted to know why I had so many barrels, how they worked, and whether they too could store water legally. The more I explained, the more they realized that the HOA had been misleading them. My barrels weren't dangerous, they were practical. They weren't illegal, they were approved by county law. Soon, whispers began to circulate. A few neighbors who once avoided eye contact now stood in my yard, admiring how I had managed to keep my grass green without depending on the failing water lines. Some even asked for advice on setting up their own systems. What Karen intended as a public humiliation was transforming into a demonstration of freedom and resourcefulness. Of course, she noticed. Her smug confidence began to crack as more people started to question her authority. She ramped up her rhetoric, claiming that I was corrupting the neighborhood and endangering the community. But her words had lost their sting. The more she shouted, the more people began to see her for what she really was, a bully desperate to maintain control. And just when it seemed her grip was slipping, she made her boldest and most reckless move yet. A move that would destroy her credibility forever. The night was quiet, almost too quiet, when I noticed movement near the back of my yard. My cameras picked it up first, a figure slipping through the shadows, creeping toward the row of barrels I had fought so hard to protect. At first, I thought it might be a stray animal, but then the figure straightened, and the security lights caught her face. It was Karen. Clutching a crowbar, she moved with deliberate intent, glancing nervously over her shoulder before raising the tool against the nearest barrel. Her plan was obvious. If she couldn't beat me with fines and threats, she would destroy my water supply herself. She jabbed the crowbar into the plastic, but the barrels were sturdier than she expected. The sound echoed faintly, sharp enough to wake my suspicion if I hadn't already been watching from my monitor inside. Every strike, every attempt to puncture the barrels, was captured on camera. Her expression twisted with frustration as she realized the damage wasn't coming easily. She muttered under her breath, yanking at the lids, slamming the crowbar again and again. This wasn't just vandalism. It was trespassing, destruction of property, and proof of the lengths she would go to maintain her power. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't need to. Instead, I let the cameras roll, collecting undeniable evidence of her crime. By morning, the footage was ready, neatly packaged and waiting. I didn't send it to the HOA first. I sent it to the neighbors, the same people she had tried to turn against me. The reaction was immediate. Outrage spread like wildfire. For years, people had tolerated Karen's bullying, but now they had proof that she had gone too far. She hadn't just abused her authority, she had broken the law. And this time, there was no escaping the fallout. The footage spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. Phones buzzed, group chats exploded, and by the end of the day, everyone had seen it. Karen, the self-proclaimed protector of the community, caught red-handed trespassing and trying to destroy my property. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now spoke up, furious that she had crossed such a line. Parents worried about what else she might be capable of. Retirees, who had lived here for decades, muttered about finally being free from her reign of control. The HOA board scrambled to contain the damage. They called emergency meetings, issued statements distancing themselves from Karen, and eventually voted her out as president. For the first time in years, she no longer had power over anyone. She vanished from the streets she once patrolled daily, her red suit replaced with silence. The woman who had thrived on intimidation was suddenly powerless, undone by her own arrogance. But the story didn't end there. With Karen gone, something remarkable began to happen. The same neighbors who had once feared the HOA started working together. Families who barely spoke before came to me for advice on collecting water, installing solar, and finding ways to live more independently. What began as a petty fight over unsightly barrels had transformed into a movement for self-reliance. So, I opened my gates. I shared my knowledge freely, showing others how to build their own systems. Slowly, the neighborhood shifted. Lawns turned green again, people saved money on utilities, and a sense of unity replaced the fear Karen had instilled for years. The HOA had tried to drown me in fines and humiliation. But in the end, it was their own corruption that collapsed. They wanted control, and instead, they gave me the chance to flood their rules, and prove that true power comes from helping others, not controlling them.